The year was 1879. The land out where the Arizona Territory bled into New Mexico was a hard teacher. It taught lessons in red dust, the kind that stained the hem of a good dress and coated a man's throat before he had been in town even 1 hour. The wind never seemed to stop. It was a high, thin sound that scraped at the juniper trees and pushed tumbleweeds across the trader's path. This was a place of extremes. The nights dropped to freezing, demanding wool blankets and fires built high. The days baked the cracked earth until the heat shimmered off the high mesas. Coyote's Ford was the name of the town, though the coyote was long gone and the ford was mostly dry sand by late summer. It sat uneasily between two worlds. To the east lay the high desert plains of the Dean, the Navajo people, a vast expanse of sacred mountains and deep canyons. To the west, the foothills were being gutted for silver and coal, scarred by the ambitions of new men. The town itself was just one wide street, a collection of false front buildings that seemed to be leaning against the afternoon sun, as if exhausted by the effort of standing. The air smelled of necessity. It smelled of horse leather, curing in the sun behind the tannery, and the constant, rhythmic creak of saddles. It smelled of coffee roasted until it was nearly burnt, a bitter defense against the alkali taste of the water. And it smelled of mended wool, of lye soap, and the faint, underlying dust that coated everything. Clara Whitlow stepped down from the stagecoach, her hand clutching the small, warped wooden box in her satchel. The movement was stiff. She had been on the coach for 6 days. She felt the grit between her teeth. She was 23 years old. Though the journey had made her feel closer to 40, she had come from the east, from Boston, where the air was wet, and the expectations for a young woman were rigid and suffocating. She was supposed to be a teacher, an apprentice really, but that was only half the truth. The other half was that she was a fugitive. She was fleeing a sensible, arranged engagement to a man who smelled of starch and banking ledgers. A man who had looked at her as if she were a column of figures he was adding up. Her refusal had caused a scandal small enough to be contained, but large enough to make her departure a necessity. Her possessions were few. A heavy trunk, which the driver dropped into the dust with a grunt, was already coated in the pervasive red powder. She carried a small valise, and the 2 items she never let out of her sight, her mother's leather-bound journal and the broken music box. The box was made of dark, scarred cherry wood. Its brass inlay was tarnished. It had been her mother's comfort during a long illness. Now, it was just silent wood and metal, a broken promise. Clara pulled her thin wool shawl tighter. Though the sun was hot, this landscape did not offer comfort. It demanded resilience, and she looked at the hard faces of the men watching her from the saloon porch, unsure how much resilience she had left. She was looking for work. Yes, but mostly she was looking for a place where she could breathe without asking for permission. He saw the stage arrive, but he did not watch the passengers. Ashki Nez, known as Ash to the few white men he tolerated, was focused on the horses. They were lathered and tired, their ribs showing. He hated seeing animals treated as machines. He was a man of the Dine, born to the towering House clan, for the Bitter Water clan. His movements were economical, suggesting a strength kept entirely in reserve. He wore denim trousers, worn pale at the knees, and a dark blue shirt. His hair was long and black, tied back in the traditional way with a simple leather thong. Ash understood this land because he was part of it. He was not passing through. His people had been here since before the first Spanish horses. He had known loss, the deep, hollowing loss of the long walk his grandparents had endured, a shadow that still touched everything. He had also known more recent, personal sorrows, the kind that settle in a man's eyes and do not leave. Now, he made his living as a guide, a horse trainer, and sometimes a negotiator. He bridged the gap between his people and the town, a gap that seemed to be widening every day. His gaze drifted past the town, toward the northern grazing lands where his family's sheep grazed near the hidden springs. He had seen the new surveyor's stakes that morning, They were driven deep into the earth, well inside the boundaries agreed upon by treaty. Lucien Harrow, the man who owned the silver mine and half the town, wanted a railroad. Harrow spoke of progress and jobs, holding meetings where he passed out free whiskey. Ash saw only steel cutting across the land, severing the path to the water. He knew Harrow was not just building a railroad. He was claiming the water that fed the entire valley. Inside the dusty saloon, Sheriff Boone watched the stagecoach arrive through the dirty window. He rubbed the back of his neck. He was a man caught in the middle, and the position was chafing him raw. He wore a badge, but he knew the law in Coyote's Ford was whatever Lucien Harrow decided to pay for that week. Boone was tired, his conscience as heavy as the gun on his hip. He saw the new teacher get off the stage, a small, pale woman who looked like a sparrow in a den of hawks. He sighed and turned back to his warm beer. Across the street, Maya Bigay, Ash's cousin, worked in her small shop. The sign above the door just said, "Leather Goods." The scent of tanned hides and beeswax filled the small space. She was a woman of sharp eyes and even sharper stitches, her hands rarely still. She was pragmatic, her heritage rooted in the dine traditions of her mother, but her business sense honed by the town's harsh realities. She saw the new teacher arrive and noted the worn boots and the straightness of her spine. Maya was practical. She knew survival out here was about skill, not hope. She wondered how long this one would last. Further down the street, Deacon Abel sat on a bench outside the small adobe church, reading a worn copy of the Psalms. He was an old man who had seen too much violence in his youth and now preached a gospel of peace in a land built on confrontation. He respected Ash, whose stillness reminded him of the canyons. He distrusted Lucien Harrow, whose smile was as bright and false as a gilded button. This made the deacon a quiet but steady complication for the mine owner, a moral anchor in a town threatening to drift. Clara knew she needed to find the land office, but first she needed to walk. She needed to escape the stares of the saloon loafers and the oppressive silence of the journey. She walked away from the main street, her boots sinking into the soft dust. Following the thin, hopeful sound of shallow water, she found a small creek, barely more than a trickle. Its banks were steep and slick with dark, red-brown mud from a recent, sudden storm. That is when she saw the struggle. A young colt, leggy and the color of wet sand, was trapped. Its left foreleg was stuck deep in the sucking mud near the water's edge. It whinnied, a high-pitched, terrified sound. On the opposite bank, a spotted mare, obviously the mother, paced frantically, calling back to her foal. Before Clara could even think what to do, a man appeared. He moved with a quiet swiftness that startled her. He seemed to come from the earth itself. It was the man she had noticed near the stagecoach horses. The Navajo man, Ashkenaz. He did not seem to see her. His focus was entirely on the panicked animal. He slid down the muddy bank, his boots sinking. He spoke low, a soft, rhythmic sound in his native tongue. It was not a command, but a reassurance. He waded into the thick mud without hesitation. The colt thrashed, its eyes wide with terror, and in its struggle, it sank deeper. "He is afraid," Ash said. His voice was calm, directed at the animal. But she knew he was acknowledging her presence. He strained, trying to get leverage under the colt's chest. "He will break his leg if he fights me." Clara, forgetting her Eastern manners and the state of her only good traveling skirt, scrambled down the bank. The mud immediately grabbed at her shoes. "What can I do?" she asked. Ash looked at her then, truly seeing her for the first time. He seemed surprised to find her there, her hat askew and her face streaked with dust. He had seen women like her arrive before. They usually stayed inside, complaining about the heat. "Push!" he commanded. His voice was not unkind, but it held no room for argument. "When I lift, you must push his rump. Push him toward the bank, hard." Clara put her gloved hands on the colt's muddy flank. The animal was trembling, its small body hot with fear. "Now," Ash said. He put his shoulder under the colt's belly, his muscles bunching under his shirt. He lifted with a deep grunt, his feet sinking almost to his knees in the clay. Clara pushed with all her strength. The mud made a sickening sucking sound as it released its grip. For one terrible moment, the colt was suspended between them. Then it found its footing on firmer ground and scrambled up the bank, slipping once before running on 3 legs straight to its anxious mother. The mare nudged her foal, checking him over, and then led him away at a fast trot. Ash rose from the mud, breathing hard. He was covered in it, from his chest to his knees. Clara looked down at herself. Her skirt was ruined, her gloves were caked in the thick, heavy clay, and her shoes were likely lost. She started to wipe her hands on her skirt, then realized it was a lost cause. She felt a ridiculous urge to laugh, or maybe to cry. She looked up and found him watching her. He had a smudge of red mud across one high cheekbone. "Thank you," he said. His English was clear, with only a slight cadence that marked it as his second language. He had not expected help. Clara just nodded, her throat suddenly tight. He took a step toward her. He was still on the lower bank, and she was a few feet above him. He offered his hand to help her up the last few feet to the dry path. She looked at his hand. It was strong, calloused, and covered in the same red mud that covered her. She placed her muddy glove into his palm. His grip was not rough, but it was profoundly steady. It was the first time she had felt secure since stepping off the stage in Boston. The touch was brief, practical, yet warmer than the afternoon sun. It was a simple, human gesture in a place that seemed determined to grind all humanity down. This, she thought, was the West. It was not just the violence and the dust. It was this quiet strength rising from the mud. He pulled her up easily. "You should be careful by the water," he said, releasing her hand. "The banks are not to be trusted." "I will remember that," Clara said, finding her voice. "Is the colt?" She paused. "Is he all right?" Ash nodded, his gaze already on the horizon, watching where the horses had gone. "He will be sore, but he is not broken." He gave her one last, assessing look, and then he was gone, walking back toward the town with the same silent, ground-covering stride, leaving her alone by the muddy creek. Later, in the small, hot room she rented above the mercantile, Clara tried to clean her skirt in the shallow basin. The water turned the color of rust. It was no use. She sat on the lumpy mattress and looked at the silent music box on the rickety table. It was broken, she thought, just like the peace in this town. She already knew, from the way men whispered Lucien Harrow's name in the store, that a fight was coming. She had heard the man at the land office mention the railroad survey. It was about progress, he had said. But Clara had seen the way Ashki Nez looked at the northern hills, and she knew it was about the water. She opened her mother's journal, its pages filled with pressed flowers and faded script about botany in a Boston garden. Her mind, however, was not on the faded ink. She was thinking of the weight of a man's hand, steady and sure, pulling her up from the mud. The music box sat silent on the table, its intricate gears waiting. It would not play. Not yet. Clara secured a temporary position teaching at the town school. It was not so much a school as a single, drafty room attached to the back of Deacon Abel's church. She had 12 students, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Their faces were smudged with dust, and their lessons were often interrupted by the sound of mule teams hauling ore from Harrow's mine. It was from the children that she first heard the name Bitter Spring. It was not just a name. They spoke of it with a reverence that surprised her. It was, they explained, the only water for miles that ran sweet and deep all through the summer. It was where the Dine watered their flocks, where the town's own small cattle ranchers filled their barrels, and where the best wild mint grew. "My PA says Mr. Harrow is going to put a fence on it," a small boy named Eli whispered, his eyes wide. He says the railroad needs all the water for its engines. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft coming through the warped window frame. She remembered the surveyor's stakes she had seen from the stagecoach. A railroad cutting across the land was one thing, claiming the only reliable water was another. It was not progress. It was a siege. That same afternoon, miles north of Coyote's Ford, Ashki Nez rode his buckskin pony along the ridge overlooking the high pasture. The air was still, but it felt wrong. He had seen the surveyors, too. This land was his family's grazing allotment, recognized by treaty. A treaty the white men seemed to read only when it suited them. He reined in his horse, his eyes narrowing. Down in the valley, near the sacred boundary marker his grandfather had set, was a fresh yellow stake, and another. 50 yards further, they formed a straight, uncompromising line, aimed directly at the hidden canyon that held Bitter Spring. He dismounted and walked to the nearest stake. It was new pine, smelling of the sawmill, driven deep into the red earth. He heard the jingle of harnesses before he saw them, 3 men on horseback, riding up from the creek bed. They wore heavy canvas jackets despite the heat, and their belts were weighted with pistols. The lead rider, a man with a scarred lip and dull eyes, stopped his horse 10 feet from Ash. He worked a piece of tobacco in his jaw. "That is company property. Navajo. Best leave it be." Ash did not look at the man. He kept his gaze on the stake, on the violation it represented. "This is Dine Land," he said. His voice was quiet, yet it carried in the vast stillness. "These markers are wrong." The man spat a brown stream into the dust. "Things are changing, Chief. Mr. Harrow is bringing the future. You cannot stand in the way of the future." "The future needs water," Ash said, finally lifting his gaze. "The same as the past. This spring feeds us all. Your railroad will kill it." "The railroad buys what it needs," the man sneered. "And what it cannot buy, it takes." He deliberately nudged his horse forward, forcing Ash to take a step back or be trampled. "You are just one man. We are the railroad. You best remember that." Ash said nothing. His face was a mask of stillness, but his hands, resting at his sides, were tensed. He watched them ride away, their laughter ugly and loud in the quiet air. He pulled the stake from the ground. The wood was smooth in his hand. It felt like a weapon. That evening, Clara needed to buy ink. The mercantile was closed, but the saloon, the Thirsty Devil, was loud with music and shouting. She hesitated. It was not a place for a lady, but the storekeeper also ran the saloon, and she had no choice. She slipped in, keeping her head down, intending to find him at the bar. The air was thick with smoke, the smell of stale beer, and sweat. She saw Sheriff Boone at a back table, staring into a glass, pointedly not looking at the group of men at the bar. They were Harrow's men, the surveyors from that afternoon. Then the batwing doors swung open, and Ashki Nez walked in. The saloon went quiet, the way it does when a wolf walks into a sheep pen. He ignored the stairs and walked directly to the bar. "I need a word with the sheriff," he said to the barkeep. Before the barkeep could answer, the scar-lipped man from the ridge slid off his stool. "Well, look what we got here. The savage wants to talk." Ash turned slowly. He held the yellow survey stake in his left hand, holding it down by his side. "I am here to see Sheriff Boone." "The sheriff is busy," the man said, stepping into Ash's path. He was bigger than Ash, broader in the shoulder. "Maybe you should talk to me. You seem to have found some of our property." He gestured to the stake. "I found it on our land," Ash said. "Our land," the man laughed. "I do not see no fences. I do not see no deeds. All I see is dirt, and a redskin standing where he is not wanted." "That is enough, Jeb," Sheriff Boone said from the table, but his voice was tired, lacking authority. The man named Jeb ignored him. He poked Ash in the chest. "You are trespassing, boy. In our town, in our saloon. Why do we not teach him some manners?" He shoved Ash, Ash did not shove back. He simply absorbed the impact. His feet planted, his expression unchanging. The stillness seemed to enrage the man more than any resistance. "What is the matter? Savage too sacred to fight," Jeb snarled, balling his fist. He swung. Ash moved, not back, but to the side, and the man's fist hit the wooden bar with a solid, meaty thud. Jeb roared in pain and lunged, grabbing for Ash. It was over before Clara could even gasp. Ash did not strike. He used the man's own momentum, pivoting on his heel, using the stake as a lever against the man's arm. Jeb went flying, crashing over a table and landing in a heap of broken chairs and spilled whiskey. The other two men pulled their guns. "No!" Clara shouted. The voice was hers, but it sounded high and thin, like a stranger's. Everyone froze. They turned to look at her. This small woman in a gray dress, standing by the door. Jeb groaned, clutching his arm. "She is with him." "I am not," Clara said, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. She looked directly at Sheriff Boone. "Sheriff, I saw the entire thing. This man," she pointed at Jeb, "assaulted him. Mr. Nez only defended himself." Sheriff Boone finally stood up, his chair scraping loudly. He looked at Clara, at Ash, and at the furious, drunken men with their guns drawn. He was trapped. Jeb staggered to his feet. "He is lying! She is lying!" "I am not lying," Clara said, stepping forward. "I will write a formal statement. I will sign it. I am the new teacher. I saw what happened." The word statement hung in the air. A written record. A legal document. It was a language these men understood and feared more than bullets. Jeb looked at his friends. The fight was gone, replaced by sullen confusion. Lucien Harrow paid them to stake land and break heads, not to get involved in paperwork that could end up in a Prescott courtroom. Boone let out a long breath. He knew Harrow owned the saloon, and likely the men in it. But he could not ignore a signed statement from the town's new teacher. "Put the guns away," he ordered, and this time, his voice had steel in it. "Jeb, you are done for the night. Go." Jeb glared at Ash, then at Clara, his eyes full of malice. He grabbed his hat and stormed out, his friends following like curs. The saloon was quiet again. Ash stood by the bar. He had not moved. He looked at Clara, his dark eyes unreadable. He gave her a single, sharp nod. And then he, too, was gone, slipping out the door as quietly as he had entered. Later that night, Sheriff Boone sat in his office, the door locked. He heard a knock. He opened it to find Lucien Harrow standing there. Harrow was a handsome man, always dressed in an expensive suit, his silver hair neatly combed. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. "A difficult evening." "Sheriff Tur," Harrow asked, stepping inside without an invitation. "Jeb was drunk, Mr. Harrow. He started it." "Jeb is employed by my company," Harrow said smoothly, sitting on the edge of Boone's desk. "His morale is important to me, and my company, as you know, pays a significant portion of this town's taxes, the same taxes that pay your salary." He placed a small, heavy leather pouch on the desk. It landed with a soft, metallic clink. Boone looked at the pouch. He felt sick. "What do you want?" "Harrow, I want the railroad. I want progress. I want men who understand the big picture. That Navajo, Ash, he is a problem. He fills the other dine with old ideas about sacred land. He is standing in the way. He has a right to—" "He has nothing," Harrow interrupted, his voice dropping. "And that new school teacher, sticking her nose where it does not belong, she needs to be reminded how precarious her position is. I want you to make sure this statement of hers disappears, and I want you to have a talk with Ash. Tell him to stay on his side of the river. If he does not—" Harrow smiled again. "Well, accidents happen on the frontier." Boone stared at the pouch of money. It was enough to pay his debts, enough to buy a small piece of land. It was also the price of his soul. "I will handle it," he said, his voice a low rasp. The next day, Clara sought out Ash. She found him not in town, but in the small canyon where his family kept their horses. He was working with a young mare, gentling her with quiet words and a length of soft rope. "Mr. Nez," she said, approaching slowly. He continued his work, not looking up, though he acknowledged her with a slight tilt of his head. "Miss Whitlow." "I wanted to ask you," she said, stopping a few yards away, "about the land, the markers. The children spoke of Bitter Spring." He finally stopped, turning to face her. "The spring is life. Our sheep, our horses, the town, too, though they forget it. Harrow wants to own it. He thinks water is like silver, something to be dug up and sold." "But the treaty," Clara said, "does it not specify the boundaries?" Ash gave a short, bitter laugh. "The white man's paper, it changes with the wind. They make a sign, and then they make new papers." "I want to help," Clara said, her resolve hardening. "I can write to the county assessor. I can write to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. If I have the facts, if I have the boundaries—" Ash looked at her for a long time. He saw the earnestness in her eyes. He had seen it before, in other reformers, other do-gooders from the East. They came, they got angry, and then they left, and his people were left to deal with the ashes. "You should not have spoken in the saloon," he said, his voice flat. "You made an enemy of Jeb, of Harrow." "I told the truth." "The truth is a dangerous thing here," he said. "It does not matter what you write. The men with the guns and the money will win. They always win." "I do not believe that," she said, her chin coming up. He almost pitied her. Her innocence was a fragile thing in this land. He thought of his uncle, who had trusted a peace treaty and had been shot for his trouble. He thought of the land taken, the promises broken, the slow, grinding erosion of his people. "Your letters will be lost," he said, "or they will be filed away by men who are paid by Harrow." "Then what do we do?" she asked. He was silent. He had planned to fight, as he always did, with silence and small acts of resistance, pulling stakes, diverting Harrow's men, a war of shadows. But this woman, with her pale skin and her surprising fire, was offering something else, a fight in the open. He looked at her clear, unwavering gaze. She was not afraid, or perhaps she was and simply did not let it stop her. It was a foolishness he found himself respecting. "The boundaries of the old treaty," he said slowly, making a decision, "are marked by stones, not stakes. They are hard to find unless you know where to look." He agreed to meet her, to show her. It was a risk, a deep betrayal of the caution he had lived by for years. But he was tired of watching his world be stolen, piece by piece. That night, the sky was moonless, thick with stars. A fire bloomed in the darkness south of town. It was bright, too bright. By the time the townspeople gathered, the large wagon was a skeleton of burning wood. It was the community supply wagon, the one Ash and his family used to transport wool, blankets, and cured meats to the trading post. Everything was gone: corn, flour, hides, and a season's worth of Maya's finest leatherwork. Ash walked through the smoking ruins as the sun came up. The smell of burnt corn and charred leather choked the air. Sheriff Boone was there, taking notes in a small book. "Looks like a stray spark from a campfire," Boone said, not meeting Ash's eyes. Ash knelt. He pointed to the ground, to a series of deep footprints preserved in the damp earth near the creek. They were boot prints, all the same, and on the heel of each one was a clear, distinct emblem. It was the shape of a spur, with a long, cruel shank. "Black spur," Ash said, his voice dangerously quiet. Boone's face went pale. Everyone knew the Black Spur. It was the name Harrow gave his private team of enforcers, the men he paid to break strikes and clear squatters, the men like Jeb. "I will look into it, Ash," Boone said, closing his book. "You will find nothing," Ash said. He stood up. He looked at the ruin of his family's livelihood, and then he looked toward the town, toward the mine glinting on the hill. Clara had heard the commotion and had come running. She saw the burnt wagon, the destroyed goods, and the look on Ash's face. It was not anger. It was something colder, deeper. It was the look of a man pushed too far. She saw the black spur print in the mud. She looked at Sheriff Boone, who was already walking his horse back to town. His shoulders slumped. She knew, then, what she had to do. She had a stagecoach ticket in her room, a ticket back to the quiet, predictable safety of Boston. She could be on that coach in 2 days. She could forget the dust, the violence, and the cold eyes of Lucian Harrow. But she also saw the faces of the children in her school, wondering if they would have water. She saw Maya Begay, her head held high, looking at the ashes of her work, and she saw Ash, standing alone, a man who believed the truth was a dangerous luxury. She walked over to him. "Show me the stones," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "Show me the boundaries. I am not leaving." He looked at her, surprised. "I came here to teach," she said, pulling her thin shawl around her. "I think this is the first real lesson. I will write it all down. I will write the truth." He held her gaze. He saw that she meant it. She was a fool, he thought, a brave, stubborn, Eastern fool, and for the first time since his brother had died. Ashki Nez felt something other than loss. He felt a flicker of something that might, if he was not careful, become hope. Lucian Harrow had a flair for the dramatic. He did not call his meeting in the smoky confines of the Thirsty Devil, nor in the spare sanctity of Deacon Abel's church. He chose the open air, the wide, dusty space in front of the mercantile, as if he had nothing to hide. He had arranged for 2 barrels to be set up on planks, one dispensing free whiskey, the other a weak, warm lemonade. It was a gesture of false generosity, and the town, thirsty for any kind of diversion, had gathered. Harrow stood on the bed of a heavy freight wagon, a natural stage. He was dressed in a fine black suit, his silver hair catching the morning light. He looked like a statesman, not a man who paid for arson. "Friends, neighbors, citizens of Coyote's Ford," he began, his voice booming with practiced confidence. "I look at you, and I see the future. I see pioneers. I see the hardy stock that built this great nation." He spoke for 10 minutes about prosperity. He painted a picture of a town transformed, a town with a telegraph office buzzing with news, a rail depot shipping silver and beef to the entire world. He promised them a new school, a fine brick building, not the drafty room the children currently endured. He even gestured toward Clara, who stood at the edge of the crowd, watching him with a cold knot in her stomach. "Progress," Harrow declared, his arms wide, "is a mighty engine, and like any engine, it needs fuel. It needs water." There it was. The crowd stirred. The ranchers near the back exchanged uneasy glances. Our great railroad, the vessel of our shared fortune, requires a reliable source of water to power its steam locomotives. A small price to pay for such advancement. He held up a sheaf of papers. "I am asking for the town's endorsement, a communal signature, granting my company, the Western Progress and Mining Concern, permanent and exclusive rights to the aquifer at Bitter Spring." He made it sound like a formality, a simple trade, their single, muddy spring for a golden future. Some men in the crowd, those who worked at his mine, began to clap. "Mr. Harrow?" The voice was clear, and it cut through the applause. It was Clara. She was terrified. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, but she stepped forward from the shadow of the mercantile's awning. Harrow's smile faltered for just a moment. "Miss Whitlow, our new schoolteacher. Have you a question?" "I do," she said. She held a small notebook. "You speak of the future, but you seem to be ignoring the law. I spent yesterday at the county land office. I reviewed the ledgers." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the polite applause Harrow had expected. According to Book 5, page 38, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. The grazing rights for the northern pasture, which includes the subterranean aquifer feeding Bitter Spring, are held in a communal trust, filed in 1872, for the use of all residents. Harrow's expression hardened. The benevolent statesman was gone. Your proposal, sir, Clara said, does not ask for access. It demands sole, permanent ownership. How can you promise this town prosperity when you are taking the only water source that guarantees its survival? The silence that followed was absolute. She had not just voiced a fear. She had quoted a legal document. Harrow laughed. A short, sharp sound that had no humor in it. Miss Whitlow, so diligent, so concerned with dusty old papers. He turned back to the crowd, dismissing her. She is from the East. She does not understand our ways out here. She does not understand the scale of the opportunity before us. She sees a puddle. I see a city. He then turned back to her, his voice dropping, a predator's purr that carried in the still air. This is a very complex business, Miss Whitlow, and a very rough country. It is no place for someone so delicate. He looked her up and down, a gaze that stripped her bare. Perhaps your talents would be better appreciated back in Boston. I would be happy, personally, to pay for your ticket. A fast, safe journey home, before the weather turns. The threat was unmistakable. Leave, or be made to leave. Clara's face went pale, but she did not back down. She held her ground, trembling. A man moved through the edge of the crowd. He moved with a silence that drew every eye. It was Ashki Nez. He did not look at Harrow. He did not look at the armed men from the Black Spur gang who were flanking the wagon. He walked past the whiskey barrel and did not stop until he was standing beside Clara. He did not touch her. He did not speak to her. He simply stood there. His presence was a statement, a shield. A few Dine elders, who had been watching the meeting with distrust from the far side of the street, nodded. Ash turned his head slightly and spoke to them in Navajo. His voice was calm, measured. He was translating, not just Harrow's words, but the legal challenge Clara had made. He was making sure there was no confusion, no room for Harrow to lie in two languages. Harrow saw it all. His attempt to isolate the schoolteacher had failed. Ash had just publicly, silently, aligned himself with her. The man who represented the old treaty and the woman who had just read from the new one were standing together. Harrow's face was a mask of cold fury. He clapped his hands together, a false, booming sound. A wonderful discussion. Food for thought. We will continue this dialogue tomorrow. He jumped down from the wagon, his meeting over. He had lost control of it. As he stalked away, he gave Ash and Clara one look, a look that promised retribution. That evening, Clara sat in her small room, the heat of the day still trapped in the walls. A light knock came. It was Maya Begay. Ash's cousin entered without waiting for an answer. She held a small, expertly stitched leather pouch. You were stupid today, Maya said. She did not bother to sit. I told the truth, Clara said, her voice defensive. The truth is not a shield, Maya said sharply. You signed your own death warrant, or worse. She tossed the pouch onto Clara's bed. Turquoise, for your teaching. Ash asked me to give it to you. Clara looked at the pouch, confused. But he paid me for it. He said you earned it. He does not like to be in debt. Maya crossed her arms, her dark eyes intense. Do you know what happened 3 years ago? A prospector found a silver vein up near the canyon. Harrow said it was on his claim. The prospector had papers, just like you. He argued. What happened to him? Clara asked, though she was afraid of the answer. He went for a ride. His horse came back 3 days later, saddle and all. He did not. They found his body a week after that. Apaches. The sheriff said it was not Apaches. Maya leaned closer. Harrow does not buy people who stand in his way. He buries them. Ash has known this his entire life. Now you do, too. Stay away from Bitter Spring. Stay away from Ash. Go back east. He does not need you to die for him. Maya left as quietly as she had come. Clara stared at the turquoise, feeling the cold weight of real fear. An hour later, another knock, this one heavier. She opened it to find Sheriff Boone. He removed his hat, his face creased with exhaustion. "May I come in, Miss Whitlow?" He did not wait, stepping past her and closing the door. He looked uncomfortable, his gaze avoiding hers. "Miss Whitlow, I am going to be plain. I cannot protect you." "You are the law," she whispered, her throat dry. "I am one man," Boone said, his voice low and ragged. "Lucian Harrow is a payroll for half this town. You made a public accusation today. He made a public threat. That is a bad combination in this territory." "He burned that wagon," she said, finding a spark of anger. "The black spur print." "I did not see him burn it. I did not see his men do it. The tracks are cold. The ashes are scattered. I cannot act on a boot print and a suspicion." He finally looked at her, his eyes full of a weariness that went bone deep. "I cannot arrest a man for wanting water, or for offering to buy you a ticket home." He took a step closer. "You want to fight him? You want me to fight him? You need something hard, something he cannot deny, something a judge in Prescott will look at." "What?" "An original map, not the copy in the land office, which he could claim is a forgery. A drilling log from his mine. Something that proves he knows he is tapping the aquifer, that he knows he is stealing, a payroll, a ledger, something that connects his money directly to the Black Spur gang. You bring me evidence like that," he sighed, "and I can act. I will act. But you bring me anything else, and you are just wind in the trees. Good night, ma'am." He left her alone in the suffocating silence. She was beaten. Maya was right. Boone was right. She had only words, and Harrow had guns and money. She felt the pull of Boston, of safety, of a world that made sense. Her gaze fell on her mother's broken music box. It sat on the table, a mute reminder of another life. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the tarnished brass inlay. It was heavy, too heavy for its size. She had turned it over 100 times, trying to find what had broken, what had silenced the melody. She ran her thumb along the faded green velvet on the bottom. In one corner, the fabric was loose. A thread had pulled away. Curious, she picked at it. The velvet peeled back, not just fabric, but a whole panel. Underneath it was not wood. It was a thin, dark piece of tin, disguised to look like the bottom of the box. A false bottom. Her heart began to hammer. Her fingers, slick with nervous sweat, fumbled with the tin lid. She pried it open with her nail file. Inside, folded into a perfect, tiny square, was a piece of oiled linen, yellowed with age. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely unfold it. It was not a letter. It was a map. It was drawn by hand, with an architect's precision. The ink was faded, but clear. It showed the ridges and canyons, the arroyos and the mesas, and running through it all, drawn in a faint blue ink that was almost invisible, was a delicate, branching line. It was labeled in tiny, perfect script subterranean aquifer, est flow. In the bottom right corner, there was a small, neat inscription. Survey Section 7, E or W, Assistant Cartographer, 1868. Elizabeth L. Whitlow. Her mother. Clara sank onto the bed. The map spread open on her lap. Her mother, who she remembered only for her pressed flowers and her gentle demeanor. Her mother, who the world had dismissed as a hobbyist. She had been here, more than 10 years ago, as an assistant surveyor. She must have made this copy, her own secret record, and hidden it. Clara scrambled for her satchel, pulling out the notebook filled with her notes from the county office. Communal Trust, Survey Section 7, filed 1872. It matched. This was it. This was the original map Sheriff Boone had spoken of. This proved the water was known, mapped, and existed before the treaty was even filed, before Harrow had ever set foot in this territory. She could not wait until morning. She grabbed her shawl and ran from the room, down the stairs, and into the dark, empty street. She did not know where he lived, but she knew where he kept his horses. She ran to the livery stable, the air cold in her lungs. She found him in the hayloft, not sleeping. He was sitting in the open loft door, the moonlight silvering the barrel of a rifle he was cleaning. "Ash," she said, breathless, clutching the railing. He looked up, his movements still. The rifle did not waver. "You should not be here, Miss Whitlow. It is not safe for you to be out." "I found it," she said, climbing the last few steps. She held out the small linen map. "The proof, the original map." He put the rifle down carefully and took the map from her. He held it up, letting the pale moonlight shine through the linen. He saw the familiar lines of the canyons, and he saw the faint, blue lines of the water. His eyes traced the path, a path his grandfathers had known from sacred stories, now drawn in a white man's ink. "My mother drew this," Clara said, her voice shaking. "She was here years ago. She knew." Ash looked from the map to her face. The quiet pity he had felt for her, the Easterner, was gone. It was replaced by a sharp, sudden respect. She was not just a woman with a quick tongue and a notebook. She was the daughter of a mapmaker. She had a history here, a history written in secret ink. "This is a good paper," he said, his voice low. "It is strong." He folded it carefully and handed it back to her. "But it is not enough." "What do you mean?" Sheriff Boone said. "Boone needs proof, Harrow knew," Ash said, cutting her off. "This proves the water is there. It does not prove Harrow is stealing it. He will say his map is different, that he did not know." Ash stood. He pointed out the hayloft door, toward the dark mesas to the north. "The treaty boundaries, the ones my grandfather marked to match this section, they are stone. They are marked with the sign of my clan. They match this map." He looked back at her. His decision made. Harrow's new stakes, the yellow ones, are inside that line. His men are pulling up the old stones, replacing them, trying to steal the land one rock at a time. They are trying to change the map on the ground. "We have to stop them," Clara said. "We have to prove it," he corrected. "We must find the original boundary markers, the ones they have not yet destroyed. We must show they match this map. We must show Harrow is knowingly moving them." "When?" Clara asked. Ash picked up his rifle. He looked at the sky, where the first, palest hint of gray was touching the eastern horizon. "Not when," he said. "Now. We ride before dawn." The air was thin and cold, holding the last of the true dark. Coyote's Ford was asleep, a line of false fronts hunched against the pale starlight. Clara met Ashki Nez behind the livery. He was not waiting. He was simply ready. He held the reins of two horses. One was his familiar buckskin. The other was a steady-looking sorrel mare, already saddled. He had a rifle in a scabbard and a heavy roll tied behind his saddle. He handed her a canteen, the metal cold against her glove. "This is half of the water," he said. His voice was low, part of the pre-dawn quiet. "We drink only when we stop, not before." Clara nodded, her throat tight. She secured the canteen to the saddle horn. She was clumsy, her fingers stiff. He watched her, then, without a word, he checked her knot, tightening it with a single, efficient pull. She mounted the mare. The leather creaked, a sound that seemed loud enough to wake the entire town. Ash swung onto his buckskin in one fluid motion. He looked at her. "We will ride north for 2 hours before the sun. We must be off the flatlands when it gets light." They moved out, not as two people, but as two shadows. They walked the horses through the soft dust of the street, past the dark saloon, past the silent church. Once they cleared the last building. Ash nudged his horse into a long, ground-eating trot. Clara followed, her small valise, which held her notebook and the precious map, bouncing against her hip. The broken music box was in there too, wrapped in her only spare shawl. The sun did not rise gently. It ripped the horizon open, flooding the world with a harsh, white light. The land, which had been gray and mysterious, was now a vast expanse of red rock and thorny scrub. The heat began almost immediately, a physical weight. They were in the high desert, a maze of washes and flat-topped mesas. Ash set a pace that was relentless but not punishing to the horses. He seemed to be reading a map Clara could not see. He would pause, scanning the ground, and then shift direction by a few degrees. "Tracks," he said once, pointing. Clara looked and saw nothing but gravel. 3 riders, he elaborated. "Shod horses. Heavy. They rode this way yesterday." He looked at her. "They are looking for the stones, too." The wind picked up, a steady, hot breath that carried sand. It stung Clara's cheeks. She fumbled with the scarf she had tied over her hat, but it kept slipping. Ash stopped his horse. He watched her struggle for a moment. "That will not hold," he said. He dismounted and walked over to her. He pulled a dark red bandana from his own saddlebag. "This is better." He stood close to her horse. She leaned down. "Turn your head," he instructed. She obeyed. He efficiently tied the bandana around her face, covering her nose and mouth, the knot secure at the back of her neck. "It keeps the dust from your lungs and the sun from your skin." His fingers brushed her neck as he tied the knot. It was a practical, impersonal touch. Yet it was the second time he had touched her, and she felt the same jolt of steady warmth. It was the touch of a man who was competent, who understood the world he lived in. She felt her respect for him deepen. It was a different kind of intelligence from the one she knew, a kind that was written in sand and sky, not books. "How do you know where you are going?" she asked, her voice muffled by the cloth. He pointed to a distant, flat-topped mesa. "That is the Guardian. My people say it watches the spring." He then scooped a pinch of sand from a rock. He held it in his open palm and let the wind take it. "The wind is from the west. It will be stronger by noon. We must find the canyon before then, or we will be caught in the open." When they stopped to rest the horses and drink their small ration of water, Clara pulled out her journal. She began sketching the shape of the mesa, making notes. Wind measured by sand. Guardian Mesa, black spur tracks, 3 riders. She was documenting, just as her mother had. By midday, the heat was an oven. Ash led her into a narrow arroyo, the dry bed of a creek that only ran during the flash floods. The high rock walls offered a sliver of shade. "We are close," he said. He dismounted and tied the horses to a skeletal, gray bush. "We walk from here." He led her up a steep, rocky path. It looked like a dead end, just a jumble of boulders. Ash stopped and studied the rock fall. He seemed to be counting, measuring. He moved to a large, flat rock and began digging at its base with his hands. "They tried to cover it," he said, his voice tight. He dug faster, pulling rocks and sand away. After a minute, his fingers hit something solid. He cleared the remaining debris. It was not a stake. It was a column of red sandstone, about 2 feet high, set deep in the earth. It looked like any other rock, until he brushed the last layer of dust from its face. Carved into the stone was a symbol. It was not writing. It was a simple, elegant drawing of a tower with the water flowing from its base, the mark of his clan, the towering house, and the mark of the bitter water. "This is it," he said, "the first marker." Clara knelt, her hand tracing the carving. It was old, the edges worn smooth by time and wind. She pulled her mother's map from her valise. She unfolded it and held it next to the stone. "Look," she breathed. In the margin of the map, her mother had drawn the exact same symbol. Marker 1, Section 7. "She saw this," Clara whispered, touching the stone. My mother touched this stone. Ash looked at her, at the wonder in her face. This was no longer just about water. It was about her past, too. "Quickly," he said, his voice softening. "Draw it. Draw the stone. Draw the symbol, and draw the valley, so you can show where it stands." Clara worked fast, her pencil flying across the page. She sketched the stone, the carving, and the profile of the guardian mesa in the background. It was undeniable proof. "We must go." Ash's voice was urgent. He stood, scanning the rim of the arroyo above them. "What is it?" "Horses. 2 of them. Coming fast." He grabbed her arm. "To the horses. Now." They scrambled down the path. As they reached the bottom, 2 riders appeared on the rim above, silhouetted against the white-hot sky. "There they are," a voice shouted. "The Navajo and the girl." A rifle shot cracked, the sound echoing flatly in the canyon. The bullet sparked off a rock, 10 feet from Clara. "Ride," Ash yelled. He shoved her toward the mare, untied the reins with one slash of his knife, and swung onto his own horse. Clara did not hesitate. She hauled herself into the saddle. They galloped down the arroyo, the horses' hooves thundering on the hard-packed sand. The men above were firing, their bullets whining and ricocheting. The arroyo twisted and turned. Ash led, knowing every bend. He was not panicked. He was focused, his body low over his horse's neck. He was leading them out of the canyon, not deeper in. They burst out onto a wide, high plain that bordered a sheer cliff, a drop of 500 feet. The 2 riders, who knew the terrain, had cut across the top and were waiting for them. It was Jeb, the man from the saloon, and another man with a face like a ferret. "End of the line, savage," Jeb sneered, leveling his rifle. Ash reined in, his horse dancing. He kept himself between Clara and the men. "We are just riding. Jeb." "You are trespassing," Jeb said, enjoying the moment. "Mr. Harrow does not like trespassers, especially ones who pull up his stakes." "These are not Harrow's stakes," Clara said, her voice shaking but defiant. "We found the stone marker. We know the boundary." Jeb's smile vanished. He looked at the other man. "She knows. We have to take them." He raised his rifle. Ash was faster. He did not draw his pistol. His rifle, which had been resting across his lap, came up. He fired once. It was not a killing shot. It was a shot of impossible skill. The bullet hit the wooden stock of Jeb's rifle, shattering it and sending splinters into Jeb's hand. Jeb screamed and dropped the weapon. The other man fumbled for his pistol. Ash's voice was like ice. "Do not!" The man froze. "Get off the horses," Ash commanded. The men dismounted, Jeb clutching his bloody hand. Ash dismounted too. He walked toward them, his rifle held steady. "Your pistols, drop them." They unbuckled their gun belts and let them fall. Ash kicked them away. "You cannot leave us out here." The ferret-faced man whined. "We will die." "You have boots," Ash said. "The town is a 10-mile walk." He looked at Jeb. "You tell Harrow. You tell him I know where the stones are. You tell him to stop." Jeb, pale with pain and fear, just nodded. "Wait," Clara said. She looked at the ferret-faced man. He was young, barely 20, and terrified. "Why are you doing this for a few dollars?" "Harrow pays well," the young man mumbled, avoiding her eyes. "He is stealing," Clara said. "He is stealing the water from your own children." "I just do what I am told," the man stammered. "We was just supposed to pull the old rocks, put in the new stakes. He has got a whole warehouse of drilling gear up at Dry Mercy. He is going to drill right into the aquifer." Clara's eyes met Ash's. A warehouse, drilling gear. "Dry Mercy?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Yeah," the man said, desperate to trade information for his life. "The old ghost town. He stores his dynamite and his drilling equipment there. He keeps his real maps there." The ones showing the drills. Get walking, Ash said to Jeb. Jeb glared, then turned and began to trudge back the way they came. Ash looked at the younger man. What is your name? Sam, he whispered. You tell no one you spoke to us. Sam, Ash said. You walk back with him, but you remember what you said. Sam nodded, wide-eyed, and scrambled after Jeb. Ash gathered the rifles and pistols. He emptied the bullets onto the ground. He tied the weapons to the saddles of the 2 abandoned horses, then slapped the horses hard on the rump. They galloped off, back toward town. The men were disarmed and afoot. They did not ride back to town. Ash knew it was not safe. Harrow would know they had been discovered. He led Clara deep into a cluster of high boulders, a place hidden from any trail. He did not light a fire. The air was growing cold, but the risk of smoke was too great. He gave her a piece of dried meat and the last of her water ration. They sat in the twilight, the rocks around them glowing purple. The silence was deep. You are good with a rifle, Clara said quietly. I was taught to hunt, he said, not to kill. There is a difference. He was checking his own rifle, his movements economical. Thank you, she said. You saved my life. He shook his head. We saved each other. Your words about the marker, it made them careless. They did not expect you to be brave. They sat for a long time. The first stars appeared. My grandmother, Ash said, his voice soft. She survived the long walk when they were forced from our lands. She told me that the soldiers could burn their homes and kill their sheep. But the one thing that broke them was the thirst. They were marched for 400 miles. She said she learned then that water is not just a thing to drink. It is hozo. It is peace, balance. It is life. She said to never trust a man who does not respect water. Clara nodded, pulling her knees to her chest for warmth. My mother, she said, her voice catching. She was not just a gardener. I found her journals. She was a scientist, a cartographer. She did the calculations for the chief surveyor. But when the reports were published, her name was not on them. It just said, Field Assistance by E.L.W. She was a woman, so she was just assistance. But she drew the map, Ash said. She hid it. She knew its value. Yes, Clara said, touching the valise at her side. She knew. A silence settled between them, no longer empty, but filled with a shared understanding. They were both the children of people who had been discounted, whose truth had been buried. The wind was cold now. Clara shivered, pulling her thin shawl tighter. Ash looked at her. He saw her trying to tie her bandana, the one he had given her, back around her neck for warmth. But her fingers were numb. Here, he said. He leaned over. It was very close in the small space between the rocks. He took the cloth from her and very gently retied it, his fingers brushing the skin just below her ear. She could feel the warmth from his hands. He did not pull away immediately. His gaze met hers in the dim starlight. It was not a look of passion, but of something deeper, recognition. You are strong, he said, his voice a low murmur, like the women of my people. He drew his hand back. The moment was over. As he moved, his hand brushed her valise, which was sitting between them. From inside the bag came a single, clear, metallic sound, a plink, like a drop of water hitting a tin roof. They both froze. What was that? Ash asked. Clara's hand flew to the bag. My music box. She pulled it out, her heart racing. It is broken. It has not made a sound in years. She held it in her hands. It was silent again. She turned the key. Nothing but a dull, rusty click. Ash looked at the box. He reached out one finger and gently touched the tarnished brass inlay, tracing the outline of a flower. And as he did, from deep within the mechanism, another note sounded. A high, sweet, single note that hung in the cold night air for just a second before fading. Clara stared at it, her mouth open. It was the first note of the lullaby her mother used to play. Ash pulled his hand back, as if startled. He looked at Clara, and a small, slow smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Perhaps," he said softly, "it is not broken. Perhaps it was just waiting for the right time." They did not sleep. The cold of the high desert night seeped into their bones. Ash watched the stars, his face a mask of stone. Clara sat clutching her valise, the memory of the single, pure note from the music box echoing in her mind. It felt like a small, impossible miracle, a whisper of hope in the darkness. "Dry mercy," Ash said, his voice breaking the long silence. "The ghost town. It is a full day's ride, northwest. We cannot go back to Coyote's Ford. Jeb will have told Harrow. They will be watching the trails." "They will be watching for us," Clara said, her newfound courage settling into a cold resolve. "But they will not be watching for us at his warehouse. We must go." He nodded. He gave her the last of the dried meat. They mounted their horses and rode, not east toward home, but deeper into the unknown. Rocky land, they rode by the pale light of the stars, Ash navigating the treacherous, dark landscape as if it were a sunlit path. He moved through shadowed canyons and across high, stony plains, avoiding every known trail, every trader's route. Clara followed, her trust in him absolute. They saw Dry Mercy as the sun, a brutal copper coin, began to heat the sky. It was a scar on the land, a town built on hope and abandoned in despair. Tumbleweeds, skeletal and gray, had gathered against the leaning walls of the saloon. The windows of the assay office were broken, dark, empty eyes. The only sound was the high, thin shriek of the wind whistling through a rusted windmill. And in the center of the decay, it stood a new, large warehouse. It was built of fresh pine, the wood still pale. It was an obscenity in the ghost town. It was locked with a heavy, modern brass padlock. Ash dismounted and examined it. "This is not a simple lock," he said. He pushed on the heavy door. It was solid. "We cannot shoot it. The sound would carry for miles." "Then we are stuck," Clara said, her hope faltering. "I told Maya," Ash said, scanning the ridge lines around the town. "I told her where we were going, the stone marker. I told her if we were not back by sunrise to be aware." "But you did not tell her to come here." Clara said. "No," he said. "We wait." They hid the horses in the collapsing livery stable and waited. The hours dragged. The sun beat down on the abandoned town. The heat was suffocating. Clara felt a creeping despair. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky, 2 riders appeared. They were not the wild, charging riders of the Black Spur. They rode steadily, keeping to the shadows. Ash stepped out of the livery. The riders stopped. It was Maya Bigay and Sheriff Boone. Clara ran out. "Sheriff, but how?" "Quiet, Miss Whitlow," Boone snapped, his face haggard. He swung down from his horse. "I am not here. I am officially in Coyote's Ford, investigating a complaint about a missing pig. Do you understand me?" Maya dismounted, her face grim. "I saw Jeb and Sam. They rode into town looking like they had been dragged through a cactus patch. They claimed they were jumped by Apaches. But I saw Jeb's hand, splinters, a bullet, not a knife. I knew you had found trouble." She glanced at Boone. "I also knew you would be smart enough to go for the warehouse. I persuaded the sheriff that a night ride would be good for his health." Boone glared at her. "She told me if I did not come, she would tell Harrow that I was the one who told you to look for evidence in the first place. I am a compromised man, Miss Whitlow." "The lock, Maya," Ash said, cutting through the conversation. Maya pulled a small, stitched leather roll from her saddlebag. She unrolled it, revealing a set of thin, strange, and beautiful metal picks. "Harrow buys expensive locks," she murmured, kneeling. "But he buys them from the same catalog I do." She inserted a pick in a tension tool. Her hands were as steady and precise as a surgeon's. The silence of the ghost town was absolute, broken only by the faint click Click, click of the tumblers. After a long minute, there was a solid, satisfying thunk. The shackle sprang open. "I will keep watch," Boone said, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. He took a position at the corner of the street. "You have 10 minutes. Not 1 second more. Then I am gone." Ash pushed the heavy door open. It groaned on its hinges. They slipped inside. The air was cool and smelled of machine oil, raw pine, and dynamite. It was vast. In the dim light, they could see stacks of steel drilling pipe, heavy steam engines, massive coiled steel cables, and dozens of crates stamped with the word dynamite. "This is not for a railroad," Clara whispered, her hand to her mouth. "This is a mine. He is going to mine the water." "He will drain the aquifer in less than a year," Ash said, his voice flat with a cold fury. "In the corner," Clara said, pointing. "An office." It was a small room, partitioned off with raw planks, a desk, a chair, a cold lantern. Ash lit the lantern, the sudden yellow light throwing huge shadows. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk. Ash picked up the top one, a ledger, Drilling Logs Dry Mercy Project. He read. Clara grabbed it. Her eyes scanned the columns. Date, depth, flow rate. He has been testing. He has already drilled 3 test wells. He knows exactly how much water is there. "This is it," she said. But Ash was looking at a long, cardboard map tube. He unfastened the lid and slid out a heavy, rolled parchment. He spread it on the desk. It was a beautiful, professional survey. Western Progress Rail Line. Proposed route. Clara read. She traced the line, and her heart sank. It is a legal route. It bypasses Bitter Spring completely. This map, it proves nothing." Ash leaned closer, holding the lantern low. "What is this?" he said, pointing to a series of faint, almost invisible smudges near the spring. Clara looked. Her pulse quickened. "It looks like a stain." She thought of her mother's journals, of the stories of surveyors and their tricks. "Heat," she whispered. "Bring the lantern." Ash held the lantern, and Clara held the map above the hot glass chimney. She was careful, keeping the paper moving, not letting it get close enough to burn. It happened slowly. Then, all at once, faint spiderweb lines, the color of old, dried blood, began to appear, like a ghost rising through the parchment. It was a second map, drawn in invisible, heat-sensitive ink. It was the aquifer. It was her mother's map, duplicated perfectly, with one horrifying addition. A series of red X's, labeled DM1, DM2, DM3, were drawn directly over the heart of the spring. Proposed drill sites. A tiny script read. This was Harrow's true plan. The railroad was a lie, a cover for the water theft. "He knew," Clara breathed. "He knew all along." Ash was not looking at the map. He had found another book, Black Spur Payroll. He opened it. His finger ran down the page. Jeb, security, $50. Sam, security, $50. 2 more men, survey removal, $100 each. He is paying them to pull up the old stones. Ash said. "Wait," Clara said, grabbing the drilling log. She flipped to the back. There was a section labeled Expenditures. She read, County Clerk T. Davis, filing fee, $500. "He did not just bribe a county official," she said, her voice shaking. "He bought him." A sharp whistle cut through the air. "Boone! Riders!" he yelled. 6 of them! They are coming in fast!" "The back!" Ash yelled. He grabbed the 2-layered map. Clara snatched the payroll and the drilling log. They ran through the dark warehouse, fumbling for a rear door. Ash found it, a simple bar, and threw it open. They spilled out into the darkness just as the front doors burst open. "There they are!" a voice bellowed. Gunshots exploded, the sound deafening. "Go!" Boone shouted. He fired his rifle from the corner. "Providing cover." "To the arroyo north I will find you." Ash, Clara, and Maya ran to their horses, mounted, and galloped into the night. But the world was dissolving. The wind that had been a low moan all day was now a physical, roaring wall, a sandstorm. It hit them with the force of a train, a suffocating, stinging mass of grit and noise. Clara was blinded instantly. The world was gone, replaced by a screaming, black chaos. She could not see the ground, could not see her own horse's head. "Ash!" she screamed, terror clutching her throat. A shape appeared beside her, a ghost in the swirling dust. It was Ash. He was off his horse, his hand gripping her bridle. "You will be lost," he shouted over the roar. "Give me your hand." She reached out. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like steel. He had a length of rope in his other hand. With a few impossibly fast movements, he tied one end securely around her wrist. "Hold this," he yelled. "Do not let go." She felt him tie the other end to his own wrist. "I will lead," he cried. "My horse knows the way your horse will follow. Trust me." He disappeared back into the storm, but she felt him. The rope went taut. It was a single, steady pull in the center of the howling madness. It was her only anchor. It was him. Clara closed her stinging eyes and held on to the rope, surrendering her fate to the man at the other end. He led them on, not away from the storm, but through it, into a narrow, twisting arroyo. He knew this land by touch, by memory. The rock walls, which he could feel rather than see, buffered the worst of the wind. For hours they moved through the roaring dark, connected only by a 6-foot length of rope. They found shelter at dawn. The storm had passed, leaving the world scoured and clean. They were hidden in a deep cleft of rock, miles from dry mercy, exhausted, their skin raw, their hair matted with grit. They had the evidence. They parted ways. "I will ride back to town," Maya said. "I will spread the word that you were both caught in the storm, that you are lost. It will buy you time." Ash and Clara hid the precious documents. Ash wrapped the map and the ledgers in oiled canvas and secreted them high in a dry crevice in the rock wall. "No one will find this," he said. "When the time is right, I will retrieve it." They slipped back into Coyote's Ford separately, under the cover of the next night. Clara felt like a wraith, returning to her small, hot room. The town was buzzing. The Black Spur riders had returned, furious, saying their prey had vanished. The rumor was even worse. Lucian Harrow was not waiting. He was furious that his warehouse had been breached. He was forcing the issue. He had announced a formal groundbreaking ceremony for the railroad, to be held in 3 days. He was bringing in his own judge from Prescott to rubber stamp the land grant. Clara met Ash at Deacon Abel's church, the only safe place left. Maya was there. So was Sheriff Boone, his face a mask of defeat. "I cannot stop him," Boone said, his voice flat. "He is declaring it private property. The judge is on his payroll. It is over. He wins." "No," Clara said. They all turned to look at her. She was standing by the empty pulpit, her small frame rigid. "He wants a ceremony," she said, her voice clear in the quiet church. "He wants an audience. We will give him one." "What do you mean, child?" Deacon Abel asked, stepping out from the shadows. "We do not go to the judge," Clara said. "We go to the town. We reveal the evidence at his ceremony. In front of the miners, the ranchers, the children, everyone. He wants to give a speech, I will give one too." Maya's eyes widened. "He cannot arrest the entire town." "He will not shoot the town," Ash said. He had been silent, standing by the door. Now he stepped into the moonlight streaming through the window. "He will shoot you, Clara, and me." He looked at the small group. "A man like Harrow, when he is shamed, when he is cornered in public, he does not use lawyers. He uses bullets. You do this. You must be ready." Clara looked at the plain wooden cross above the altar. She thought of her mother's hidden map, of the children afraid of a dry spring, of the rope tied to her wrist in the storm. "I am ready," she said. Lucien Harrow's groundbreaking ceremony was an exercise in arrogance. He had set his stage on the very land he intended to steal. A flat expanse of dusty ground north of town. Red, white, and blue bunting, already limp in the morning heat, was strung between wagons. Barrels of free whiskey and lukewarm lemonade stood sweating, drawing a crowd of miners, ranchers, and curious townsfolk. Harrow himself stood on the bed of a heavy freight wagon, dressed in a black suit that must have been agony in the sun. He looked rested, confident, and pleased. Beside him sat a small, weak-chinned man he introduced as Judge Palmer, an esteemed legal mind from Prescott, who had arrived on the morning stage. "Today, my friends," Harrow boomed, his voice rolling over the quiet crowd. "We do not just break ground, we break the chains of stagnation. We bury the superstitions of the past and lay the first steel tie of prosperity." He spoke of the railroad. He painted a picture of Coyote's Ford as a hub, a new Denver. He promised jobs to the miners, shipping contracts to the ranchers. He never mentioned water, not once. "And now," he said, picking up a silver-plated ceremonial shovel, with the full endorsement of the law. He gestured to the judge, who nodded enthusiastically. "We begin the future." He was about to plunge the shovel into the earth when Clara's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the air. "You are a liar." The crowd gasped, turning as one. Clara Whitlow stood at the front, her hat gone, her face pale but set. She was not alone. Ashki Nez was 10 feet to her left, his rifle held loosely, pointing at the ground. Maya Bigay was to her right, her arms crossed. Harrow's smile turned to ice. "Miss Whitlow, I thought I had made my position clear. You are not welcome here." "And I am making my position clear," she said, stepping forward. She held up the heavy parchment, the 2-layered map Ash had retrieved from the rock crevice. "You are not building a railroad, Mr. Harrow. You are building a water mine." She did not wait for his response. She spoke to the crowd, to the ranchers whose cattle were already thin, to the families who depended on the town well. "This is Mr. Harrow's real map. The one he showed the judge is a lie, this one." She held it high. "Was drawn in invisible ink. He is plotting to sink 3 massive drills directly into the heart of Bitter Spring. He is going to drain the aquifer dry." Harrow laughed, a harsh, forced sound. "The woman is hysterical, sun-touched. She is reading fantasies." "Am I?" Clara's voice shook, but she did not back down. She held up the drilling log. "Then is this a fantasy, your own drilling logs, Mr. Harrow, from your warehouse in Dry Mercy, signed by your own engineer? It details 3 test wells. You know exactly how much water you are stealing." A low, angry murmur started in the crowd. The ranchers were looking at each other, their faces hardening. "And this," she cried, holding up the payroll ledger. "The Black Spur payroll, a record of every dollar you paid your thugs. Jeb, security, $50. Sam, security, $50. And this entry. Gentlemen, 2 men, survey removal, $100 each. He is not just stealing our water. He is paying his men to move the treaty stones, to steal the very land itself." "That is enough," Harrow roared. He signaled to Jeb and the other Black Spur men, who were positioned at the edge of the crowd. "Seize those documents. They are stolen property." "They are evidence," Maya Bigay said, her voice sharp. She stepped forward, holding a stack of papers. "And I have made copies. For every rancher here. See for yourself the future he is planning for you." As Maya began to hand out her meticulous, hand-drawn copies of the ledgers and the hidden map, all semblance of order collapsed. The ranchers surged forward, grabbing the papers, their faces turning from confusion to rage. "Do your jobs!" Harrow screamed at his men. Jeb, his hand heavily bandaged, drew his pistol. He did not aim at Clara. He aimed at Maya, the source of the duplicates. "Give me those papers, girl." He cocked the hammer. Before he could fire, a single rifle shot cracked, flat and final. It was not a sound of chaos, but of precision. Jeb's pistol exploded in his hand, the metal disintegrating, sending the weapon flying from his useless, bleeding fingers. He screamed, clutching the ruined hand. Ashki Nez stood still, his rifle smoking slightly. He had not moved, had not raised it. He had simply fired from his hip. He levered another cartridge into the chamber, the shing-chick sound cutting through the din. The other black spur men, their hands on their own pistols, froze. They were suddenly facing a dozen angry ranchers who had drawn their own weapons. It was a standoff. "Arrest that man!" Harrow shrieked, his face purple. He pointed a trembling finger at Ash. "Sheriff Boone, do your duty, arrest that savage for inciting a riot." Sheriff Boone had been standing near the whiskey barrel, watching. He now walked slowly into the center of the clearing, into the space between Ash and Harrow. He stopped and looked up at the man on the wagon. "I saw no riot." "Mr. Harrow," Boone said, his voice surprisingly loud and steady. "I saw an armed man on your payroll about to fire on an unarmed woman. I saw Mr. Nez disarm him with admirable skill to prevent a death. The only person inciting violence here," he said, "is you." Harrow's mouth opened and closed. He was speechless. "I cannot arrest Mr. Nez," Boone continued, reaching up and unpinning the tin star from his vest, "because I'm a material witness. I was at Dry Mercy. I saw those ledgers. I saw that map. I helped retrieve them." He held the badge in his palm. "And by the authority vested in me by the Arizona Territory, I am hereby placing a temporary injunction on this entire project. All work is to cease, pending a full investigation by a territorial marshal." He looked at the pale judge from Prescott. "This meeting is over, and I suggest you be on the next stage out of town. Your Honor." The crowd erupted. It was a roar of relief and victory. The ranchers surged forward, and Harrow's men, seeing the tide turn so completely, melted away into the chaos. Harrow, his face a mask of disbelief and pure hatred, stumbled back. He said nothing. He climbed down from the wagon and into his private carriage, slamming the door. He rode out of town, leaving his bunting, his whiskey, and his silver shovel behind. The town celebrated. They felt they had won. They felt the law, in the form of Sheriff Boone, had finally worked. The celebration was short-lived. Evening fell. Clara, Ash, and Maya gathered in Maya's leather shop. The door locked. The original documents were hidden beneath a false bottom in a heavy chest. They were exhausted, the adrenaline fading, leaving only a deep weariness. "We did it," Clara said, leaning her head against the cool adobe wall. "We won this," Maya said. "But he will not stop. A man like that." A sudden, jarring silence fell on the street outside. The usual sounds of evening, a distant piano, the murmur of conversation, all ceased. "Lena," Maya said, her head snapping up, her younger sister. Lena, a quiet, watchful girl of 8, had been playing with scraps of leather on the porch just outside the door. "Lena." Maya threw the door open. The porch was empty. Lena's small stool was overturned. "She cannot have gone far," Clara said, her heart beginning to pound. Ash stepped out onto the street. He knelt, his eyes scanning the dust in the twilight. He saw nothing. Then, a glint of blue by the alley wall. He walked over and picked it up. It was a single turquoise bead from the necklace Lena always wore. Beside it, pressed deep into the dust, was a boot print. It had the clear, sharp outline of a spur with a long, cruel shank. "No," Maya whispered, her hand going to her throat. A boy from the mercantile ran up, breathless. "Miss Begay, this was nailed to the post office door. It has your name on it." Maya ripped the folded paper from his hand. She read it, her face draining of all color. She handed it to Ash. Clara read it over his shoulder. The message was concise. The evidence for the child, the originals, midnight, at the old mission ruins. Come alone, or she is the first to see the new well. The town, which had been celebrating, was suddenly sick with fear. They gathered outside Maya's shop. Their victory turned to ashes. They were divided. It is just paper, one of the miners said. God Almighty, give him the maps. It is a child. A rancher, his face grim, shook his head. And what happens then? He has the maps, he has the water, and he has the girl. He will kill her anyway, to silence her. He will own us all. The crowd argued, their fear making them angry. Sheriff Boone looked helpless. The mission is on his own land. It is outside my jurisdiction. I cannot lead a posse in there. It would be a massacre. He would kill her the second he saw us. Clara looked at the angry, frightened faces. This was her fault. Her victory had cost a child's life. She looked at Maya. Maya was standing still, her face like a stone. She was sharpening a long, thin skinning knife. The shk, shk, shk of the stone, the only sound. Clara, Maya said, her voice terrifyingly calm. Get the maps. No, Clara said. Maya stopped sharpening. She looked at Clara. No, Clara repeated, her voice trembling but finding its strength. We do not trade people for paper. That is what he does. If we do that, we are no better than him. We lose Lena, and we lose the water. Maya's face crumpled. The knife fell from her hand. She is right, Ash said. He stepped out of the shadows. No trade. He looked at the crowd. And no posse. Boone is right. An attack will get her killed. Harrow expects an attack. Or he expects Maya to bring the maps. He will not expect one man. He turned to Maya. I know the ruins. I know the ridges behind it. He will watch the road. He will not watch the sky. He put his hand on his cousin's shoulder. 24 hours is too long, he said softly. She does not have that much time. He is angry. He will act by midnight. Give me until then. I will go alone. I will be a shadow. I will bring her home. Maya looked at him, her eyes wide with terror, but she nodded. The crowd dispersed, leaving them in the terrible silence. Ash went into the shop. He did not take his rifle. It was too long, too clumsy for silent work. He took Maya's newly sharpened knife. He took a coiled rope. He filled his canteen. He pulled a dark shirt over his head. Clara watched him. Her hands clenched. He was walking into a nest of men who wanted him dead, armed only with a knife, to save a child. He was at the door, a shadow in the moonlight. Ash, she whispered. He stopped. She ran to her valise and pulled out the small, scarred cherry wood box. Her hands were shaking. You said, she whispered, her throat aching, that it was waiting for the right time, that it was not broken. She pushed it into his hands. The wood was heavy, solid. It was my mother's. It is all I have left of my home. He looked at the box, then at her. Take it, she pleaded, tears running down her face. Take it with you, so you remember, so you both come home. Bring me back my home. He looked at the box. This foolish, heavy, useless, beautiful thing. He understood. It was not a weapon. It was a promise. It was the sound of the world they were fighting to build. He did not put it in a bag. He slipped it deep into the pocket of his denim trousers, the weight of it solid against his thigh. He put his hand on her shoulder, his grip hard. Just for a second. Then he turned and was gone, melting into the darkness of the alley, a shadow moving toward the mission ruins. The sky over the mission ruins was a bruised, starless purple. Ashki Nez had not gone alone. Clara had refused to stay behind. She had argued, with a desperate, quiet fury, that he would need a lookout. He would need someone to create a diversion. He had finally, reluctantly, Agreed. Not for her to go into the ruins, but to wait at the ridge. To watch. They rode fast, pushing the horses, bypassing the trail and cutting through the high, rocky mesas. They were halfway to the ruins when the sky tore open. It was not a gentle rain. It was a cold, driving deluge, a solid wall of water that turned the canyons into roaring rivers within minutes. The wind howled, and lightning cracked, splitting the sky and illuminating the world in brief, terrifying flashes of white. "We cannot stay in the open," Ash yelled over the storm. "The arroyos will flood. We must find high ground." He grabbed her mare's bridle, pulling her horse along. He knew this land, every crack and fissure. He led her up a steep, treacherous goat path, the horses slipping on the wet rock. He half dragged, half pushed her horse into the mouth of a dark cave, a shallow opening in the side of a red rock cliff. They stumbled inside, soaked to the bone, pulling the nervous horses in with them. The cave was not deep, but it was dry. It was a shallow, wind-carved hollow, just large enough to shelter them. Ash pulled the saddles from the horses and rubbed the animals down with a dry blanket from his roll. Clara sank onto the sandy floor, her body shaking, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely breathe. She was colder than she had ever been in her life. Ash worked quickly. He found dry brush in the back of the cave, scrub that had been packed in by generations of animals. With his flint and steel, he coaxed a small, nervous flame into life. It sputtered, then caught, and a tiny, smokeless fire began to crackle. He threw his own wool blanket around her shoulders. "You must get dry," he said. His voice was rough. She looked at him. He was soaked, his dark shirt plastered to his skin. His wet hair was loose, framing a face of carved granite. A thin line of blood trickled from a scratch on his temple, where a wind-whipped branch had struck him. "You are hurt," she whispered. He touched his temple, seemed surprised to find blood, and wiped it away on his sleeve. "It is nothing." He sat on the other side of the small fire, not too close, but near enough to share its meager warmth. The fire licked at the dry wood, crackling, a small, brave sound against the roar of the storm outside. The world was a chaos of wind and water. Inside the cave, there was only the fire, the nervous stomp of the horses, and the two of them. Clara watched him. He was staring into the flames, his expression unreadable, his focus already on the mission ruins, on the child he had to save. He was a man made of purpose. She realized with a sudden, painful clarity how much he was risking, and how much she had come to care for him. "This is my fault," she said, her voice a low, shaking thing. "Lena, the town, all of it. If I had not come here—" He looked up, his dark eyes sharp. "No," he said. "This is Harrow's fault. He is the one who drew the map in invisible ink. He is the one who paid for the fire. He is the one who took the child." "But I pushed," she insisted, tears welling, hot, in her cold eyes. "I pushed everyone. I forced the confrontation, and now a little girl—" "You forced the truth," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "We were dying slowly. He was taking the water, piece by piece, and the town was letting him. You made them see. What comes now, it is the price of the truth. It is not your fault." The fire crackled. She looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of the rough wool blanket. She was a teacher from Boston. She was in a cave in the middle of a storm, on her way to help rescue a kidnapped child from a man who wanted her dead. And she was sitting with a Navajo warrior who was going to walk into a den of armed men. Alone. The enormity of it, the strangeness of her new life, overwhelmed her. She felt stripped bare, all her Eastern manners, all her book learning, all of it washed away, leaving only the terrified, essential core of who she was. "I am frightened," she whispered, the admission torn from her. "Not just of this, of everything." She looked at him, her gaze direct, vulnerable. "Back home, I was running, from a marriage, to a man I did not love, a man who looked at me like I was property he was acquiring. I was supposed to be his wife. She took a shaky breath. I was afraid of him. I was afraid of that part of marriage. I did not want to be used. She looked down, her face crimson, her voice dropping so low he had to lean forward to hear her. I am still a virgin, Ash, and I am shy. She finally said it. The secret shame, the fear that had defined her. She had said it to him. She waited for him to laugh, or to look away, or to show the same cold incomprehension her fiancé had. Ashki Nez did none of those things. He did not move. He simply watched her, his expression softening from the hard lines of the warrior to something else, something gentle. He reached across the small fire, not to touch her, but to show his hand, palm up. He then lifted his hand and placed it flat over his own heart. He nodded once, a slow, solemn acceptance of her confession. Then I will be gentle, he said. His voice was a low vow, a promise that resonated deeper than the thunder outside. And I will be yours, for life. Clara's breath caught in her throat. He was not just accepting her fear. He was matching it with a promise of safety, a promise of respect, a promise of everything. He moved then, not fast. He came around the fire and knelt beside her on the sandy floor. He did not grab her. He simply knelt there, close, letting her feel his warmth. He gently took the wet rag she had been using to clean her face and touched it to the scratch on his own temple, cleaning away the last of the blood. She looked up at him. He was so close. She could smell the rain on his skin and the scent of the wood smoke in his hair. He was waiting, giving her the choice. She leaned forward, just an inch. It was all he needed. He met her, his mouth covering hers. It was the first time she had ever been truly kissed. It was not the chaste, dry peck of her former fiancé. This kiss was slow and warm. It was not a kiss of taking, but of asking. It was gentle, just as he had promised. It was hesitant at first, and then, as she responded, it deepened. A shared warmth against the cold, roaring night. It tasted of rain and salt and the small, brave fire. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. They were both breathing, their breath mingling in the cold air. I have no home, Clara, he whispered, his eyes closed. My people's land is stolen. My family is scattered. I am a man who lives in the canyons. I have nothing to offer you. You are wrong, she whispered back, her hand coming up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the high, strong line of his cheek. You are not a place. You are a person. You are my home. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation. It was a kiss of sealing, of two broken pieces fitting together. He pulled the blanket tighter around her, drawing her against his side. His arms went around her, holding her securely. They did not go further. The promise was not about bodies. It was about lives. It was an oath made in a storm, in a hidden place. He held her, and she, for the first time, felt truly safe. She rested her head on his shoulder, his strength a solid wall against the terror of the night. He held her as she wept, silent tears of fear and relief. He did not speak, but his arms were a promise that he would not let her fall. She finally slept, her breathing growing deep and even. Her body curled against his, sheltered from the storm. Ash did not sleep. He held her, listening to the rain ease to a steady drumming, his gaze on the dying fire. He held the woman who had just called him her home. He felt the weight of her words, the weight of the small, silent music box in his pocket. He was a warrior, and he had just been given the one thing he thought he would never have a reason to live. Not just to fight. When the first pale, watery light of dawn filtered into the cave, she was still asleep. The storm had passed. The world was washed clean. He did not want to wake her. He moved with infinite care, laying her down on the folded saddle blanket, pulling his own blanket over her. He looked at her, her face peaceful in sleep, the lines of fear gone. He had to go. He had to finish this. He took his knife, the one Maya had sharpened. From its handle, he unwound a thin, red leather thong. He laid it gently in her open hand, a piece of himself. Then, from a small pouch on his belt, he took a single, dark, sharp piece of obsidian, a stone his grandfather had given him for luck. He placed it beside the thong. It was his promise. He would be back. He stood and looked at her one last time. Then, as silent as the morning mist rising from the wet canyons, he slipped out of the cave and began the final, dangerous climb toward the mission ruins. Clara woke to the sound of a bird. She was alone. The fire was dead ash. She sat up, her heart leaping into her throat. Ash! She saw the red thong and the dark, sharp stone in her lap. She clutched them. He was gone. He had kept his promise to be gentle, and now he was keeping his promise to his family. She stood, her body stiff. She was a woman transformed. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in charge. The promise in the cave, the weight of his heart in his words, had burned it away. She was not a victim. She was a partner. He was going in alone, but he would not be alone. She saddled her horse, her movements quick and efficient. No longer the clumsy woman from Boston. She rode back, not to the main road, but along the ridges, her mind racing. Ash was the hand, the knife. She had to be the diversion. She had to be the distraction that would pull the guard's eyes away from the shadows he would be moving in. She thought of the town, of Deacon Abel, of the church bell. It was the loudest sound in Coyote's Ford. She rode hard, the sun rising at her back. He was going in at dusk. He had given her a plan. The diversion. She thought, it must be at dusk. A ringing bell, she thought. A call to prayer, or a call to arms. She would ring it. She would give him the cover he needed. The sun was a smear of apricot and blood, beginning to dip behind the western mesas. The air in Coyote's Ford was electric with a terrible, waiting silence. Clara had ridden her horse into a lather, arriving back in town just after noon. She found Maya in the leather shop, not working, but sitting by the cold forge, staring at the empty wall. Sheriff Boone was at his desk, drinking cold coffee, his face a map of defeat. "He is gone," Clara said, her voice breathless as she burst into Boone's office. Maya was right behind her. "Ash, he went in alone. He left at dawn. He's going to try to get Lena tonight." Boone stood, knocking his chair over. "Tonight alone. That is suicide. Harrow has at least 6 men with him. I counted them when they rode out." "He is not planning on fighting them," Clara said, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. "He is planning on moving like a ghost, but he needs help. We—" She looked at Maya, then back at Boone. "We are his help." "What are you talking about? Miss Whitlow?" Boone asked. "A diversion," Clara said. "A loud one. He will be watching for the right moment, when the guards are distracted. We have to create that moment." "When?" Maya asked, her voice a low, desperate rasp. "At dusk," Clara said, looking out the window. The light was already turning gold. "He will move when the light is failing. We have to be ready." "A diversion, child," a new voice said. Deacon Abel stood in the doorway, his ancient face grim. "What kind of diversion?" "The bell," Clara said, turning to him. "The church bell. We will ring it. Not a call to prayer, an alarm, a fire, an uprising. We will ring the bell, and we will gather the town. We will march toward the mission." "A march?" Boone was aghast. "That is a posse? He will kill the girl the second he sees us." "We will not be a posse," Clara insisted, her voice gaining strength. "We will not be armed for a fight. We will carry lanterns, not rifles. We will be witnesses. We will be a wall of light and noise. It will pull every eye, every guard, to the main road. And that, she said, her gaze intense, is when Ash will move from the shadows. It is madness, Boone whispered, but he was already checking the bullets in his revolver. It is hope, Deacon Abel corrected. He walked past them, out onto the porch of the church. The town was quiet, the streets empty, the people hiding behind locked doors, ashamed of their fear. The deacon climbed the 3 steps to the church landing, so he was above the street. "Friends," he called out, his old voice cracking with a sudden, surprising power. "Neighbors." Doors opened. Faces pale and anxious appeared. "We hide in our homes," the deacon said, "while a child, one of our own, sits terrified in the dark. We hide because of one man who told us he was the future." He pointed to the parched earth. "His future is a dry well. His progress is a burned wagon. His law is a kidnapped girl. We were told to choose. We were told to trade our future for this child." He held up his worn Bible. "The water is the gift of God. It is life. It is not a thing to be owned, to be traded. It is the breath of this land. We will not trade a child for paper, and we will not trade our future for silence." A man, one of the ranchers who had read Maya's copies, stepped out into the street. "What are we doing, Deacon?" "We are going to find our soul," the deacon said. "We are going to witness. We are going to bring Lena home." "Now," Clara cried out to Maya. Clara ran into the church, to the thick, dusty bell rope. She threw her entire weight against it. A low bong echoed across the town. She pulled again. Bong! And again. Bong! It was not a Sunday toll. It was a frantic, terrifying, urgent clang. It was the sound of an alarm. People poured out of the saloon, out of the mercantile. "To the mission!" Boone yelled, mounting his horse. He held his rifle high, but pointed at the sky. "We march as witnesses, bring lanterns." Maya was already handing out torches, lanterns, anything that would make light. A crowd of 20, then 30, then 40 people. Ranchers, miners, women, and even the older children gathered. They were angry, and they were no longer afraid. They began to shout, a low roar. They moved as one body, a chaotic torch-lit procession, leaving the town and heading down the dark road toward the mission ruins. Miles away, hidden in the rocks above the mission, Ashki Nez heard the bell. He had been in position for hours, watching. The setting sun cast long, black shadows that stretched from the broken adobe walls of the ruins. He had counted 7 men, including Harrow and Jeb, 2 guards at the main gate, 2 on the perimeter wall. Harrow, Jeb, and 1 other man were inside the collapsed chapel, where he could hear a child crying. He had been waiting for total darkness, a near impossible task. Then, faint on the wind, he heard it. Bong! 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 He looked to the east. A smile, thin and fierce, touched his mouth. Clara. The guards heard it too. "What in blazes is that?" one of them yelled. They all looked east, toward the town. "Dust," the other guard on the wall said, pointing. "A lot of it. And lights, torches." The men's attention was completely fixed on the approaching road, on the growing sound of the bell and the shouting. "It is the whole damn town," one of them shouted. "They are coming!" Ash moved. He dropped from the ridge, his feet making no sound on the sand. He moved to the west wall, the one the guards had abandoned to look east. A lone guard, left to watch the horses, was straining to see what his partners were yelling about. Ash came up behind him, a shadow in the dusk. He clamped one hand over the man's mouth, cutting off his shout. He did not use the knife. He used the butt of its heavy handle in a single, precise blow to the man's temple. The guard slumped, unconscious before he hit the ground. Ash was over the wall in a second. He slipped into the ruins, a labyrinth of crumbling walls. He heard another guard moving through the rubble, heading for the front gate. Ash waited in the shadow of a fallen archway. As the man passed, Ash looped his rope, pulling the man backward, off his feet. He drew the rope tight, a choke that lasted only 5 seconds, just until the man's struggles ceased. He left him bound and gagged. The noise from the approaching crowd was louder now, a confusion of bells and yelling. It was the perfect cover. He reached the gaping, dark doorway of the ruined chapel. He flattened himself against the wall, listening. "Not here in 2 minutes. I swear to God, Jeb, I will." It was Harrow's voice, high and panicked.
"Shut up, boss!"
Jeb's voice snarled. "They are coming. We have to go. Leave the girl."
"We do not leave the witness,"
Harrow shrieked. Ash stepped into the doorway. The room was lit by a single, smoky lantern. Lucian Harrow was there, his fine suit rumpled. Jeb was there, his right hand a thick, dirty bandage, a pistol held awkwardly in his left, and in the corner, tied to a crumbling stone pillar, was Lena. She was terrified, but she stopped crying the moment she saw him. "You!" Harrow hissed, his face contorting in disbelief. "Just one of you. Did you bring the maps?" "I am here for the child," Ash said. His voice was calm, a quiet stone in the middle of Harrow's panic. Jeb raised his left hand, the pistol wavering. He was slow, clumsy. Ash moved, a blur of motion. He was not aiming for Jeb. He was aiming for the lantern. He threw Maya's heavy skinning knife. The knife spun end over end, hitting the lantern perfectly. The glass shattered, the oil flared, and the room was plunged into absolute darkness. Jeb fired his pistol, a panicked blind shot that went wide, the flash illuminating the room for a split second. Ash did not need the light. He had already moved, using the sound of the gunshot to guide him. He collided with Jeb in the dark, driving his shoulder into the man's chest. Jeb went down hard. Ash was on him, his hand finding the pistol, wrenching it away. "Light!" Harrow was screaming, fumbling for a match. "Light, kill him?" The doorway was suddenly flooded with light, not a match. It was the light of 20 torches, held by 20 townsfolk. Sheriff Boone stood in the center, his rifle leveled. "It is over, Harrow," Boone said. The scene was frozen. Ash stood over the gasping, disarmed Jeb. Harrow was backed against the wall, his own small revolver half drawn. Lena was by the pillar, her ropes already cut. I will not be. This is my land," Harrow stammered. His arrogance shattered, leaving only a desperate, cornered rat. He raised his revolver, aiming it wildly, at Boone, at Ash, at the crowd. Bang! A single, loud rifle shot. Harrow screamed, his revolver exploding in his hand, the metal shattering, his hand a bloody ruin. He stared at it, uncomprehending. Sheriff Boone stood in the doorway, his rifle smoking. "I believe that is the second time you have witnessed Mr. Nez disarming a man without killing him. Mr. Harrow, this time," he added. "I provided the assistance." The townsfolk surged in. Maya ran past everyone, her face a mask of tears, and scooped Lena into her arms, holding her, rocking her, burying her face in her daughter's hair. "She is safe, Ash, she is safe." The other black spur men, seeing their leader captured and a mob of armed, furious ranchers at their back, dropped their weapons and fled into the night. Clara pushed through the crowd. She was shaking, her legs weak with relief, but her mind was sharp. She was holding a large, heavy wooden box with a brass lens on the front. "What is that?" Boone asked. "The doctor's camera," Clara said, her voice trembling but loud. "He was documenting a skin rash. He showed me how to use the magnesium." "Clara," Ash said, starting toward her. "Hold still," she commanded. She looked at Harrow, who was slumped against the wall, clutching his broken hand. She looked at Jeb, who was being tied up by a rancher. She looked at Ash, standing by the pillar, the cut rope in his hand. She looked at Boone, his rifle still ready. "This is the evidence," she said. Whoosh! A brilliant, blinding white flash filled the chapel, illuminating every face, every detail, stealing the scene from the darkness. The smoke, smelling of sulfur, filled the air. "A photograph for the territorial marshal," she said. A young man pushed forward from the crowd. It was Sam, the young black spur rider. I will talk," he stammered, looking at Lena, safe in Maya's arms. "I will sign a paper. He made us. He paid us to move the stones. He was going to kill the girl. I heard him tell Jeb. He said no witnesses." "Deacon," Clara said, "write that down. Write it all down. We need it witnessed." Deacon Abel was already there, his notebook open. "I hear you, son. I hear you." Boone pulled out a pair of iron handcuffs. "Lucian Harrow," he said, his voice cold and final. "You are under arrest for the kidnapping of a minor, attempted murder, conspiracy to defraud, and a half-dozen other things I will think of by morning." He snapped the cuff on Harrow's good wrist. As he yanked him forward, Harrow, stumbling and dazed, bumped hard against Ash. Something heavy fell from Ash's pocket. It hit the stone floor with a solid, wooden thud. It was the cherry-wood music box. The impact, the shock of the fall, jarred the rusted, frozen mechanism. A spring, which had been trapped for years, suddenly sprang free. A gear, long clogged, clicked into place. A single, pure note sounded in the sudden, shocked silence of the ruined chapel. And then another, and another. The music box began to play. It was not a single, hesitant note. It was the full melody, a high, clear, impossibly sweet lullaby. Note perfect, spilling out into the night. Everyone stopped. They stared at the small, scarred box playing its heart out on the dusty stone floor. Clara's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. It is playing," she whispered. Ash looked at her, his face, so long a mask of wariness, softening. He bent down and picked up the box. The music did not stop. He held it out to her, the melody, a small, defiant light in the darkness. A rancher at the back of the room, his face lit by a torch, looked at Harrow in chains, at the safe child, and at the impossible, playing music box. He raised his fist.
"We did it," he roared. "We kept the spring."
Another voice, then another, picked up the cry. "Keep Bitter Spring, keep Bitter Spring." The chant grew, a primal, joyous shout of victory. It spilled out of the ruined chapel, a wave of sound that rolled over the dark, rain-washed desert, a promise kept. The march back to Coyote's Ford was slow, heavy, and triumphant. It was not a posse returning from a lynching, but a town returning with its stolen child. Maya never let go of Lena, carrying her the entire way, the child's face buried in her mother's neck. Ash and Boone walked beside them, a silent guard. Harrow and Jeb were marched in the center of the crowd, their hands bound, their faces masks of pale, bloodied fury. Clara walked near the back, the doctor's heavy camera in one hand and the small, still-playing music box in the other. The clear, sweet melody was their marching tune. They arrived just as the sky was turning a true gray. The town was not asleep. It was waiting. When they saw the crowd, when they saw Lena safe in Maya's arms, a cheer went up. A stagecoach was waiting in front of the sheriff's office, but not the usual one. This was a government coach, bearing the territorial seal, and beside it stood a tall, thin man in a city suit. He had a face like a hawk and cold, assessing eyes. "Sheriff Boone," the man said, his voice dry. "I'm Marshal Kincaid. I received your wire 3 days ago concerning irregularities with the Western Progress and Mining Concern." Boone nodded, his face grim. "My apologies. Marshal, the situation evolved. We have your irregularities right here." He shoved Harrow forward. "This is Lucien Harrow," Boone said. "I'm arresting him for the kidnapping of this child, Lena B. Gay. We have a full confession from one of his men, Sam Tiller, and 24 witnesses." Harrow sneered. "This is a local dispute. That child is a Navajo. You have no jurisdiction." "I believe I do," Clara said, stepping forward. The music box had finally wound down, and the silence seemed profound. She held up the heavy glass plate negative from the camera. "This is a photograph of the crime, taken at the scene." She then placed the two-layered map, the drilling logs, and the black spur payroll on a barrelhead under the marshal's lantern. "And this is the motive. He was perpetrating a federal crime. Marshall, defrauding the United States government, falsifying claims, and attempting to steal water rights secured by federal treaty. His bribe to County Clerk Davis is detailed right there." Marshal Kincaid looked at the map, his eyes widening at the invisible ink now plain in the light. He looked at the payroll. He looked at Harrow's broken, bloody hand. He looked at the bound and terrified Jeb. "Lucien Harrow," the marshal said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You are under federal arrest. So are you, Tiller. And so," he said to his deputy, "is County Clerk T. Davis. Shut down his office. Seize all his books." Harrow, speechless with rage, was loaded into the iron-barred coach. Jeb and the pale-faced clerk were thrown in after him. The town stood in silence and watched as the coach turned and, with its armed outriders, disappeared into the dawn. The black and white, legal part of the justice was done. But the town's wound remained. The next day, the town gathered, not for a hanging, but for a meeting. They met in the church. It was packed. Sheriff Boone stood at the front, but he was not wearing his badge. He placed it on the pulpit. "I am resigning," he said, his voice quiet, carrying in the still room. "I failed you. I knew what Harrow was. I was tempted. I was weak. I was afraid of him. And I almost let that fear cost us our water, and cost Maya Begay, her daughter." He looked at Ash, who was standing in the back with his family. "Mr. Nez, he is a better lawman than I am. He held to the true line, and Miss Whitlow, she is a better citizen than any of us. She held to the truth." He pushed the small leather pouch of coins Harrow had given him onto the pulpit. "This is Harrow's money. I suggest you use it to build a new well, a real one. I am done." He turned and walked down the aisle, expecting silence. Instead, Deacon Abel started to clap, slowly, one by one. The ranchers and miners stood and applauded. They were not clapping for his failure. They were clapping for his honesty. Boone stopped, his face confused, and for the first time, he smiled. He walked out, a free man. "He is right," Deacon Abel said, taking the pulpit. "We need a new well, and we need to protect Bitter Spring. It is no longer just a Navajo spring or a town spring. It is our spring. It needs a guardian." A rancher stood. "I nominate Maya Begay. She copied the maps. She organized the defense. She knows this land as well as any of us, and she has the most to lose." Another man seconded. "She has the skill, and she has the courage." They voted. It was unanimous. Maya Begay, a woman, a Diney, was elected the first water commissioner of the Bitter Spring Trust. She stood, her face proud, Lena holding her hand. "I accept," she said, her voice clear. "There will be rules, rules for all. We are a community now. We will act like one." Clara had been offered her old room above the mercantile, but she did not take it. She stayed in the small, clean room at the back of the schoolhouse. She was washing the dust from her face when Deacon Abel knocked. "Miss Whitlow," he said, holding his hat in his hands. "The children are asking when lessons will resume. They miss you. They are proud of their teacher." Clara dried her hands. "I am not sure. Deacon, I was only temporary. The school board, which is to say, me and Mrs. Davis from the mercantile. have met," he said, a small twinkle in his eye. "The position of head teacher for Coyote's Ford is yours, permanently, if you will have it." Clara looked around the small, dusty room. She looked at the children's slates, still marked with their lessons. This was the work she had come to do. "I will," she said. "And," she added, an idea forming, "I would like to expand the lessons. I would like to offer an evening class for anyone who wants to learn, a bilingual class, to teach English to the Daine who want it, and," she looked him in the eye, "to teach the Navajo language to the townspeople who need it." The deacon's jaw dropped. Then he smiled. "That," he said, "is the best idea this town has had in 20 years." While Clara was finding her future, Ash was finding his past. He stood before a traditional hogan, the round, earthen home of his clan's elder. He was speaking quietly with his grandmother's brother, a Hata Ali, a singer, a man of medicine. He told him everything, the map, the fight, the town's support. And Clara, the elder, listened, his face impassive. When Ash finished, he was silent for a long time. "You have brought a white woman into our fight," the elder said. "This is dangerous. They have always broken their promises." "This one did not," Ash said. "She held to the truth, even when Harrow threatened her. Her mother drew the map of the water and kept it secret. She honored the land. The daughter has returned to finish the work." "And the town, they made Maya Bigay the guardian of the spring," Ash said. The elder raised his eyebrows. This was new. "A treaty, made of paper, can be burned," the elder said, "like your wagon." "Then we will not make it of paper," Ash said. "We will make it of stone. The town wants to build a new well and new troughs. I told them we would help. We will mark the boundary of the trust together, Dine and the town. We will carve new markers, not as a border, but as a welcome, a sign of a shared life." The elder nodded slowly. "This is Hozo. This is the new way. Go, build. We will talk with Maya. We will make the rules for the drought. Together." That evening, Clara and Ash met. They met by unspoken agreement at the small, muddy creek where they had first touched, where they had saved the colt. The water was running clear now, healed from the storm. They stood, not touching, a new, shy space between them. The fire of the cave seemed a lifetime ago. "The deacon offered me the job. She said, 'I am staying. I am the new teacher.'" "I know," he said. "It is good. You are a good teacher." He paused. "I spoke with my elders. We will make a new agreement with the town, with Maya. We will share the water." "That is good," she said softly. A silence fell. It was the silence of a question that neither knew how to ask. "In the cave," Clara began, her voice small. "You said, you promised?" "I promised I would be yours, for life," he finished, his voice steady. "My promise holds." "And I," she said, "I promised you a home." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "We should," he began, thinking of the deacon, of a church, of a white man's ceremony. "No," she said, understanding him. "Not yet." She smiled, a small, sure smile. "I have learned something out here, the West. It is not about words. It is not about signing a paper or saying a vow. It is about doing." She pointed to the ridge above them, the one that looked out over bitter spring, the one that caught the morning sun. "Let us build our house first," she said. "Let us build it with our hands. A foundation, a real home." He looked at her, his love for her so fierce it almost hurt. This practical, brave woman from the East, who understood the land better than most who were born to it. He nodded. "You are right. We will build, and then we will talk." He held out his hand. She took it. It was a simple grip, but it held the promise of a lifetime, more surely than any ring. A few days later, Clara took the music box to the town tinsmith. The mechanism was working, but the wooden case was split and the brass hinge broken from the fall. The smith, a gnarled man named Hemlock, took it. "This is a fine piece," he muttered, admiring the gears. "A good clockwork. A shame about the case." "It was my mother's," Clara said. "Aye," he said, "it deserves to be whole." He worked on it for 2 days. He mended the split wood with butterfly joints of polished tin. He forged a new, delicate hinge. He polished the brass inlay until it shone. He charged her nothing. "It is for the teacher," he said, "and for the music." That night, she brought it to the small campfire they had built on their ridge, the ridge where their house would be. Ash was there, watching the stars. She wound the key. The sound was perfect. The melody, clear and sweet, drifted into the vast, quiet desert. It was no longer a broken promise. It was whole. Clara sat and listened, and the tears she had held back for so long, for her mother, for the fight, for the fear, finally came. She wept, silently, not in sorrow, but in release. Ash moved to her, put his arm around her. He did not speak. He just held her, letting her cry. She turned and buried her face in his shoulder. His strength, his steadiness, the home she had been searching for. The community began to heal. The new well was dug, deep and sure. The new troughs were built, long, communal, where any animal, from a rancher's steer to a dying sheep, could drink. Maya, Clara, and the Dine elders drew up the drought charter. In the dry months, water would be rationed. The children, the elderly, and the animals would always come first. It was the first and only law of its kind. One night, the town and the Dine held a shared feast. A fire burned brightly in the center of town, not as an alarm, but as a celebration. The children, Dine and White, who were now classmates, were laughing, chasing each other through the shadows. Ash was sitting by the fire. Lena curled asleep at his side. Clara sat next to him, her journal open on her lap. "Tell me a story," she said. "A real one. One of your people's stories." He looked into the flames. "There is a story," he said, his voice low, "about the morning star. He is a god, a warrior. He travels a long, hard road to find his own father, the sun. He has to pass 4 great trials, of fire, of wind, of arrows, and of water, to prove who he is." Clara listened, her pencil moving, capturing his words. "What happens?" she asked. "He passes," Ash said, a small smile on his face. "He proves he is worthy. He is given a new home, and he is given a new task, to be the guardian of the dawn, to bring the new light every day." He looked at her, at the firelight on her face, at the way her hand moved across the paper. She was writing his words, and he was telling his story. They were 2 people, telling one story. The new light was coming. The high desert wind had changed. It no longer carried the taste of fear and ash. It carried the scent of wet sage from the healed land, the smell of fresh-cut pine, and the sound of drums. The first water festival of Coyote's Ford was not a ceremony of empty promises. It was a celebration of survival. It was held in the wide meadow that surrounded Bitter Spring, the ground still soft from the rains. The townspeople and the Dine families had gathered, not in separate, suspicious clusters, but together. A long line of tables was heavy with food, roasted mutton and corn from the Dine, and sourdough bread and bean pots from the town. There were drums, their rhythm a deep, steady heartbeat. There was a fiddle, its tune a high, soaring counterpoint. And there were horses, Ash on his buckskin led a half-dozen young Dine riders, their horses running in a wide, joyous circle around the meadow, their laughter carrying on the wind. Deacon Abel stood on a wagon bed. His hands raised, he blessed the water. He blessed the new community. Maya Bigay spoke next, not as Ash's cousin, but as the water commissioner. She held up the new charter. its rules clear and fair, and the town cheered. Then, Clara stepped forward. She was not the pale, frightened woman who had arrived on the stagecoach. Her skin was browned by the sun, her hair tied back simply, and she moved with a quiet confidence. She held a single sheet of paper. "When I first came here," she began, her voice clear and carrying, "I was told this was a land of freedom, a place where a person could be strong and take what they wanted." She looked at the crowd, at the ranchers and the miners, at Maya and the Dine elders. "We were told that freedom was the right of the strong," she said. "We were told progress was a railroad that would take our water. We were told justice was a handful of coins in a sheriff's hand. We learned that is not freedom. That is a prison, one we all build for each other." She looked over at Ash, who had stopped his horse and was watching her, his face filled with a pride that was as bright as the sun. "This," she said, gesturing to the spring, to the shared food, to the laughing children. "This is freedom. We learned that true freedom is not for the strong. True freedom is for those who know how to share." The crowd was silent, moved by her simple words. They applauded, a long, rolling sound that echoed off the mesas. When the applause died, Ash dismounted and walked to her. He did not speak. He held something in his hand. He uncurled his fingers. In his palm lay a heavy strand of hand-hammered silver beads, with 3 striking blue turquoise stones in the center. "This was my grandmother's," he said, his voice low. "For her alone." But the crowd went silent to listen. "She wore it when she returned from the long walk. She said it was a promise that our people would survive." He lifted it. "It is the mark of my family, my clan." He gently placed the heavy, cool necklace around her neck. It settled over her simple dress, a weight of history and belonging. "It is our promise that we will survive." Clara's hand went to the stones. She understood. This was not a gift. It was a bond. It was his heritage, and he was making it hers. She turned and took a small, familiar object from the wagon bed. The cherry wood music box, its wood mended with polished tin, its brass shining. It was whole. "And this," she said, her voice thick, "was my mother's." She held it out to him. It was a broken memory. It was a silent home. You. She looked at him. "You made it sing again. You gave me a place in your family. I am giving you a home." He took the box. He did not need to wind it. He just held it. They stood together, the woman from the east holding the silver of the Dine, and the warrior from the desert holding the melody of Boston. They did not kiss. They did not need a judge, or a license, or a church. They turned and faced the people. Their people. Deacon Abel stepped forward, his eyes wet. "In all my years," he said, his voice ringing, "I have never seen a truer vow. Go and build your home." The community, born of fire and water, was healing. The months that followed were not easy, but they were good. Maya and Lena, with a small loan from the town's new community fund, opened Be Gay Leatherworks. Their saddles were the best in the territory, and Lena, no longer silent, sat on the porch, her small hands learning to stitch, laughing as she told stories to the customers. Sheriff Boone did not stay. He had put the town in order, and one morning, Clara saw him packing his horse. "You are leaving?" she asked. He nodded, adjusting his saddlebags. "I found a new post," he said, "a scout for the territorial marshals, up north, tracking gun runners." He looked at her, his face finally at peace. "A man like Harrow, he does not just happen. He is built on a supply of guns and bad men. I am going to stop that supply." He touched the brim of his hat. "I finally get to be the law, Miss Whitlow, instead of just wearing the badge." The Bitter Spring Charter was nailed to the wall of the mercantile and the door of the church. Its rules were simple and ironclad. During any month with less than 1 single inch of rain, all water from the spring and the new town well was rationed. First priority was to children, the elderly, and livestock. Second, to the homes for washing and cooking, last to any industry. The penalty for drilling a private well, for hoarding, or for selling water was permanent banishment from the territory. The law, for the first time, had the taste of justice. Clara, with her new permanent salary, did not just teach. She bought an old, abandoned delivery wagon from the mercantile. The tinsmith, Hemlock, helped her repair it. She painted a sign on the side, "The Coyote's Ford Traveling Library." Twice a week, she filled it with books, Shakespeare and dime novels, primers and geology texts, and she drove it out to the distant homesteads and to the Dine Hogans, trading stories, teaching reading, and learning more than she could ever teach. Ash started his own school. He took the colts no one else could break, the ones that were too wild, and he took the children, both Dine and White, who were just the same. He taught them not with a bit and spur, but with a rope and a quiet voice. He taught them his grandmother's lesson that trust was a stronger bridle than fear. They built their house. They built it on the high ridge, where they had first hidden, where they had watched the stars. It was built of stone they cut themselves, and of thick adobe bricks they made with the red earth and the water from the spring. It was a small, solid house, with a wide porch that faced the east, to greet the morning star. One evening, as the first year was turning, they sat on that porch. The house was finished. Inside, a fire was burning. The air was cool and sweet. Clara wound the key on the music box. The melody, her mother's lullaby, drifted out into the vast purple twilight. Below them, in the valley, Bitter Spring was a pool of liquid gold, reflecting the last light of the setting sun. Ash put his arm around her, pulling her close. He looked at the water, then at her. "I was gentle," he said, his voice a low murmur, "remembering the cave, the storm, the promise, and I will be for life." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. She looked out at the valley, her home. She was not a fugitive. She was not a teacher. She was home. "And I," she whispered, "will always be home." Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you truly want to support us, hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners just like you.